Welcome back. These are the big stories on the AM show. And Ghana's credit ratings outlook has been upgraded from stable to positive by Moody's, a global credit rating agency, citing extensive debt treatment that has enormously curtailed the government's financial burdens. But what does this mean for Ghana's economy, really? We're delving into that issue with our guests this morning. Dr. Frank Bano. He is head of research at the Dankwa Institute, and he also is a lecturer at GIMPA. And we also have Professor Godfred Bokpin. He's an economist at the University of Ghana Business School. A very good morning to you, gentlemen. A very good morning to you, Prof.
Good morning to our cherished listeners and viewers and my co-panelists.
Right. It's been a while since we had an interaction, Prof. I hope all is well at your end. By
God's grace, we are doing well. I hope you're also doing well.
We're in there. We're coping. Like we say in Ghana, God day, we day. But let me just quickly say this. So as Moody's has come through with this latest upgrade, this latest statement, I'd just like to tease out your quick thoughts on this statement and what it really signifies from CAA2, CAA3, CA. What are the real dynamics and what does this do to our credit rating?
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning once again. I think that the announcement from the ratings agencies really, it's not surprising. It has largely been expected. The reason is that from the day government announced the preemptive debt restructuring, essentially suspending coupon payments debt, these agencies, per their rate methodology, immediately assigned us fixed spot or give chance status. So per the rating methodology, once from that empty debt restructure, it moves you out of zone to a level that's where for. So the market had anticipated this uptick. And if you look at where position, even though the two has been revised, it is not a significant improvement on the back of which you can credit the national capital market. So we still have, let me say, quite a distance ahead of us before we are put to our capital assets that be consistent with our management strategy. So yes, we can say good news to some extent, but it's not surprising, highly predictable, because we are done with the debt structure. Remember that in the case of Ghana, it was a preemptive debt restructure because the actual default had to get through the announcement that not pay, right? And then once they get an announcement, it immediately towards your credit worth and the risk methodology will take that. Okay, so you will see that for almost all the major rating agents, and in fact, they are essentially just of them. Okay, they control almost 95% of the market share in that both regionally, valley. Okay, so they certainly assigned us towards discount that and that is consistent to the rating methodology. So once done, and you will see us that when we treated the domestic debt testing, some of the risk agents signal that once Ghana completes the external debt structure, the risk methodology takes that and they're able to exit the restrictive default that some of them had placed us to a bit more level. But don't forget that if you look at the scale that where we are not at the investment grade level. Okay, so we are not out of the woods yet. So it will require us to be a bit conscious. Okay, because this is a specific intervention. Okay, that has lifted us to this level. You cannot continue to restructure your debt based on a continuous basis to get good rates. There's now a lot that we have to do in terms of governance reforms, fiscal reforms, monetary reforms, that we can consolidate and build on our feet up to a certain level where we'll be able to assess it at a cheaper rate. I have heard governments saying that the completion of the external debt structure means that we go back to the capital market immediately or soon. I advise we adopt a more short approach because it hasn't worked out. That is not
Doc, Prof, so I'm struggling a bit to hear quite a bit of what you're saying, but just the final point that you made, it does not mean what about the capital market, if you could just go back to that point.
Yeah, the mere fact that you have completed the restructuring of your external debt, both external commercial and external bilateral, necessarily does not mean that the market will be receptive to you for new bond issue. It doesn't mean that. That is not how the market works. You need to read the market. You need to read the sentiment of investors. Otherwise, you'll be disappointed. And let me give you an example. In the third quarter of 2021, government was very bullish about market sentiment. And therefore, we went to the market. Okay, the finance minister, the governor of Bank of Ghana went to the market with the objective of going to borrow. But the market rejected us. So Ghana actually lost market access from the third quarter of 2021. Not in 2022, not in 2023. Right. The market had read a much deeper meaning into the fiscal vulnerabilities, the deteriorating economic fundamentals, and they had incorporated that in their decisions. And do you know what happened at that time? At the time that we were bullish about the market, our secondary bonds, our secondary or euro bonds, were actually trading in excess of 1,500 U.S. basis points above U.S. Treasury yields. So the benchmark in terms of largely risk-free instruments is the U.S. Treasury yields. So the difference between the rate at which our bonds were trading and the U.S. Treasury yields is what we call the spread. And the spread alone was in excess of 1,500 basis points. Okay, 1 basis point is 1% of 100. So 1,500 basis points is essentially 15%. So what that means is that we were going to borrow, we would have to borrow at the rate of, let's say, 15% plus U.S. Treasury yield. But the question is, why would you borrow at that expensive rate? So borrowing is a function of both the amount you want and then also the interest rate at which you could access that money. And that has to be consistent with our prudent debt management strategy. So I would advise government to be a bit conscious, read the market, but there's a long way to go. Why am I saying so? We can't go to the market this year. It doesn't look to me realistically that we can go to the market next year, because right after the election, whatever government that is in place, there's a long way to put your government in place, your strategy, and communicate that to the market. And don't forget, right after 2025, we move into 2026. That is the final year of our IMF-supported program. That also presents some uncertainty. If you do the fiscal sustainability analysis, you realize that even though we have created fiscal space, let's say debt relief, almost 90% of the debt relief we have gotten from the domestic debt restructuring and then the external debt restructuring, both external bilateral and external commercial, are clustering within the IMF-supported program, almost 90%. So what this means is that the IMF, with their debt sustainability framework, did it intentionally to ensure that the reliefs are front-loaded for the period that their program is in place, so that the program can have fiscal space to be able to deliver on its objective. Right. Now, what it also means is that right after the IMF program in 2026, the fiscal vulnerabilities will begin to show up. And investors will price that in their decision, and they may punish us by holding us for higher yield anytime we want to issue an issue. We want to issue bonds. Don't forget, the market is not driven by love. The market is not driven by emotions. It's a market that is driven by risk, and the risk has to be priced and rewarded. So once you come onto the market unattractive, you will be punished. We should know that.
Thank you for those initial comments, Professor Bokpin. Let me bring in Dr. Frank Bano. Dr. Bano, what are your initial thoughts on Moody's upgrade of Ghana as far as our economic outlook is concerned?
To your listeners, and good morning to my colleague, Prof. Bokpin. Yes, I've heard him speak, and just like you rightly put across, Moody's has upgraded Ghana's long-term local and foreign currency issuer rating outlook from the previous levels of the CA3 and CA, to CA2 with a positive outlook. I mean, just like we have been saying over the past few months, that yes, we all agree to the extent that as a country we find ourselves in an economic quagmire, which was driven largely by external and exogenous factors, of which we can rule out. I mean, in terms of looking at the African economic landscape, there are a lot of examples that are born for us to know that indeed these are some of the factors that pushed us to where we are, in addition to other endogenous factors, of course. But what is instructive in this outlook is a sum to the fact that over the few months we have said that the country is making positive strides in terms of economic recovery, and I mean there have been counter arguments to that fact, and the fact that Moody's has come up with this rating and also alludes to the fact that these rating has been predominantly informed by the current trends in terms of economic growth. I mean, if you read the report, it makes reference specifically to the 6.9% GDP growth rate in the second quarter. It also makes reference to the country's debt restructuring, both the domestic debt, external bilateral commercial debt restructuring, which took place not long ago, with about 90% of our creditors subscribing to restructure their debt, which is bound to give us, I think, about $4.8 billion relief, and about 4.7 billion in terms of fiscal space in the spread in paying the debt. So significantly, I mean, not just to pat ourselves in the back that we have done so well, but I mean, when you see such indicators, it tells you that as a country, yes, both the monetary and fiscal policies that have been put in place is actually yielding results, and for that matter, the international community takes cognizance of these important results that are coming out of these frameworks. Now, to talk about the fact about whether this rating also gives us that leverage for us to access the international market, I think it's an argument that is too quick to be raised. Why do I say it's too quick to be raised? I mean, why do governments borrow in the first place? Why does any government have to access the international market to go and borrow? I mean, you only borrow when there is a fiscal deficit. I mean, this is basic economics. I mean, if you don't have a fiscal deficit, and for that matter, if your expenditure has not exceeded revenue, then of course there wouldn't be any economic sense for you to just wake up and say you are going to the market to borrow just for the love of just going to the international financial market to borrow. So in terms of whether government would want to borrow or not to borrow, it's something that is also hinged on the budget statement that was presented. I mean, the media budget review that was also presented to Parliament not less. I mean, remember in the media budget review, expenditure, which was originally fixed, I think, about 223 billion Ghana cedis, was revised to about 220 billion Ghana cedis. Then in terms of revenue, I think revenue we projected to hit, I think, around 178, 180 billion Ghana cedis thereabout. Then you have the...
Hello, Dr. Bano.
We also talk about other grants that are expected to come in. So, of course, if you are not projected to have that huge fiscal deficit for that matter, then there wouldn't be any need for you to access the international financial market. For me, I am one of the people of the view that even as a country, we should be cautious in our approach to borrowing. I mean, why do I say this? Now, over the years, our major problem, and I keep saying this, has not got to do with government spending, but it has got to do with our inability to raise enough revenue internally. That has been the argument I have always put forth. Because if you look at the data, if you look at the sub-region, I mean, from 2000 until 2021, the best in terms of tax to GDP revenue that we have done was actually in 2021 when we had a tax to GDP revenue of I think, 14.1%, taking grants outside. And the worst from 2000 to date was, I think, about 7.8% in 2000. Now, if you compare this to the sub-Saharan African average of about 33 top economies within the sub-region, they are doing about 15.6%. So that clearly tells you that in terms of revenue mobilization, we've not done enough. I mean, after 2021, when we had the former Minister of Finance present his budget statement to Parliament, he made reference to the fact that less than 10% of Ghana's over 30 million plus population pay direct taxes. And this, if we want to look at the actual figure, this is about 2.3 million of the entire population, which currently sits at about 34.3 million. So you have less than 10%. And if you are even being honest, this is about 8 to 9% of the entire population. That bears the burden of the entire 34.3 million people. Then clearly you have a problem. Now, one of the things I've also made in addition to this point is that, I mean, in sub-Saharan Africa, not just Ghana, I mean, we're talking about the case of Ghana, but then government spending actually drives growth. Now, that is why you find out that the situations whereby we had to go to the IMF and the government has to put in some austere measures so that growth was a bit restricted. So clearly in sub-Saharan Africa and Ghana, government spending drives growth. So anytime you say government must cut or restrict spending, invariably you are trying to tell any person who understands economics that growth should also be restricted. Let me give you a practical example.
And please end on that. End on that example. I've intentionally given both of you gentlemen ample time to lay the foundation. It appears you're going on and on. Lay your foundation, and then I shall start punching into certain areas, some of what you said. So you wrap up on that, and let's get into the main stuff.
So I mean, the whole idea has got to do with whether government will access financial market, and that's why I'm trying to lay this foundation. That the problem has to do with our inability to raise enough revenue. That's why I'm giving all these data. So indeed, if we are thinking of going into the future, I think the most important conversation for government and for any stakeholder who is a party and much interested in this very discourse should be, what are the measures, what are the reforms that any government can undertake to broaden the taxes? In other words, to formalize the economy to bring in more people to pay tax.
Let me come back to you, Doc, just briefly before I go to Professor Bokpin. So, Dr. Bano, you speak about exogenous factors or exogenous shocks. And I guess especially for this administration, COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine war will be the dogs for eternity that you will give a bad name and hang for the economic crises we have experienced. It will always be COVID-19 and the other bits. But he also tellingly mentioned the fact that borrowing must not just be for the love of it. Everybody who knows some economics knows that borrowing is not the problem. It is what you do with the resources you borrow. In our case, the question will be asked, of the 500 plus billion Ghana cedis we borrowed in terms of value now versus the 122 billion this administration inherited, you would ask yourself, did we get value for it? If you're looking at our roads, our road network, if you are looking at our hospitals, we're talking Agenda 111. How many of them will be completed before another administration comes, whether the MPP is retained or another administration comes through? There are so many things you can look at. You can look at planting for food and jobs. You can look at one village, one dam. You can look at so many different dynamics. Would you say we've got value for money? And finally, the point about our tax regime, like you rightly said, we're taxing a few people and taxing them into the ground rather than spreading it, horizontally across the board so that many more people pay taxes and then you don't have people trying to use every means to engage in tax avoidance and even in some cases tax evasion. You mentioned the sub-Saharan Africa situation, but is it also not true that if you look at our tax dynamics, especially when it comes to VAT, while we keep saying, oh, ours is lower, if you look at the spreads, if you look at certain dynamics, we are paying more in Ghana. So is it necessarily that people don't pay taxes or we don't have, is it that the systems have not been put in place to create the right structures? Which is it? And I want to ask you as well, that question from before. Are we getting value for money in terms of our borrowing, if indeed we don't borrow merely for the love of it?
Thank you for your question. I would want to start by in terms of our debt servicing. I mean, it's very, very important. Now, if you talk about debt servicing and government's inability to service debt, which debt servicing or which debt or which money is borrowed are we talking about? To be precisely and straight to the point, I mean, if we talk about our inability to service debt as we saw in 2021, 2022 to be precise, it is not necessarily the debt that has been accumulated under Akufo-Addo that we're not able to borrow, but it's the debt that has been accumulated over the years, even before Akufo-Addo has seized office as president, that has matured, that we're not able to borrow. Let me give you an example. Now, in 2015, the government at that time, I think the NDC government at that time, accessed the Eurobond market. And at that point, the Eurobond that the government accessed came out with a coupon rate of 10.75%. And on the fact of the record, you can refer to the annual public debt report. That is the highest in terms of coupon rate that any government in the Fourth Republic from Kufuor, that was issued in 2007 September till date, that we have ever had. In that same year, Ivory Coast, I think Ivory Coast, has to be precise, had defaulted, I think about 4 years or so earlier. And Ivory Coast has faced the same bond market and got a coupon rate of about 6.87%. So clearly, if we are talking about debt dynamics, it's not really about what the current government has done, but it's really about, in fact, what have we been able to do? Did we achieve or were you able to access the international financial market at a competitive rate? Because that will have it taking in effect in terms of...
Doc, hold for me on the bit about... Hold for me on the bit about a competitive rate. I mean, we would always want the best of rates when going for these foreign bonds and all of that. My question, though, is this. Maybe just clarify for me. At the time this administration took over, was the debt stock in sum indeed around 120 plus billion? Ghana
that is the nominal figure that you're quoting.
And has that figure ballooned to, of course, I know there are currency dynamics in there, exchange rate dynamics, and the value of our currency also plummeting, which has added to the debt. But is it true that where we are currently, we've added over 500 billion to that? Whether, because in any administration, you would still look at the CD, dollar, CD, whatever currency ratios as well, and they will impact anyway. So you can't take out one and say, for us, it is because this has happened. Is that not the case? Is that correct or not?
Yes. So in nominal terms, you are right. But then if you're looking at the real thing, I mean, vis-a-vis the debt currently we are looking at in dollar terms, right? Our debt stock is, I think, about a little over 50 billion USD. So in dollar terms, if you look at both administrations from 2009 to 2015, that is, I think, about $21.1 billion. And if you look at currently today, as you and I are speaking, that is also looking at approximately $22 billion. So in terms of dollar terms, I think on the scale, it's almost as far. I mean, the difference is when it comes to the exchange rate differential, because you now need to convert this dollar into exchange rate. That is where you have the nominal figure that you are quoting. But one of the most important things that one will also say is that the time value of money is not the same. For example, what is the purchasing power of 122 billion about 8 years ago? And what is the purchasing power of 500 billion today? So in terms, if we are looking at it in terms of nominal, we may be misled. I mean, it is important that we also factor the time value of money and exchange rate into it. Now, let me come to the question that you asked me specifically in terms of having value for money. And it was on the premise of that question that I tried to bring in the historical antecedents of reassessing the Eurobond market. So over the years, the monies that we've accumulated, I mean, our first subscription was in, I think, September 2007, under our former President Akufo-Addo. That was the very first time that we assessed the Eurobond market. And then between 2009 to 2012, Ghana never assessed the Eurobond market that was under former President, the late President Ivan Fatimus. Then between 2013 to 2016, every single year, Ghana assessed the Eurobond market. The question, the NPP government assumed office in 2017. There was no subscription, but in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021 was the last time that we went to the Eurobond market, and since then we've not been able to go to the market again. So you look at these trends, then you ask yourself that over the years, these amount of money that we went in for, what did we use it for? In fact, I am privy to the fact that if you look at the current administration, one of the things they had to do in terms of assessing the Eurobond market was to go and borrow at a lower coupon rate, as I said earlier, in order to retire debt that has been accumulated. In fact, the 2007 debt that was accumulated actually matured in 2017. And one of the things that I think under Akufo-Addo he has to do was to go for a competitive rate with a coupon rate that was much lower than the rate that we borrowed, I think about 8.7 or 8.85% in 2007, in order to buy back that bond. Again, as I gave you the case of 2014, 2015, I think 2015, we borrowed at that rate, and then another most important thing that has also crippled this country has got to do with the tenor. I mean, in terms of the period that we are supposed to pay back these loans. So you realize that in 2015, we borrowed at a 6-year period. So by 2021, this bond had matured, and then the government needed to retire that bond. And again, if you listen to Akufo-Addo in that particular year, one of the objectives of assessing the market was to go and borrow to come and refinance or retire this debt. So clearly, if you are asking me in terms of value for money, this has been the dynamic. So it means that over the years, whatever that we borrowed...
Dr. Bano, you're going on and on. I get what you're saying, but I'm just asking you a straight question. Did we get value for money? That's all I'm asking. You're pointing to these... Of course, when these bonds mature, Dr. Bano, when these bonds mature, they will be paid, whether contracted in this administration or that administration. I'm not concerned about that. It is trite knowledge. What I am saying is, did we get value for money for these bond issuances? You say we got them at lower rates. Whatever we did with some of these bond issuances. I'm just asking you a straightforward question. Did we get value for money? Give me a straightforward answer. I'll go to Professor Bokpin for his state.
Yeah, and as an economist, I need to do a thorough assessment of what these monies have been used for before I can tell you that yes, no, we didn't get value for money.
I think you've clarified that. So now I just want your point on that. Did we get value for money?
To some extent, yes.
Okay. Professor Bokpin, I want you to start from there before we get into the other dynamics of what this means for our risk, liquidity risk as far as this outlook is concerned by Moody's. In terms of borrowing and what Dr. Bano talks about, bonds that had been issued in the erstwhile administration coming into the Akufo-Addo administration, and what value we've got from these bond issuances, from the sums of money that we had to deal with. Would you say we've got value for money? Doc says to some extent. What do you say, Prof? Do we have Professor Bokpin on the line with us?
Yes, I'm on the line. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes, I was saying that to a large extent, the answer is no. And let me start off by adding this to what Dr. Bano has said, that, and I want to put across that no Ghanaian should accept the lie that our underdevelopment, our struggle, is simply because we have not generated enough tax revenue. The answer is no. We acknowledge that structurally, our tax to GDP ratio has been low. But then, that has never constrained any government in this country from spending the way they want to spend. It is the spending that stimulates growth. So the important thing we need to ask ourselves is whether we have spent and the spending has come with efficiency, and whether we have derived the much needed growth from that spending. The answer is no. So you see, when you look at it, and you compare that to South Africa, you will see that our performance with our regional peers are better. But if you look at the spending GDP, we are actually ranking with them. So what it is that even though revenue hasn't been out on spending, and the difference is the spending borrowing, and there's not practically wrong with borrowing to the extent that we invest the borrowed funds in enhanced capacity of the economy. Then you will get a much needed growth, and your economy is a position serving the principal and the interest. So we have borrowed, and we have not spent them efficiently. And inefficiency in our public.
Prof, please reposition a little so I can hear you better. Just reposition a little.
Okay, is it better?
Better. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So it is the inefficiencies, the corruption, the procurement infractions, that is what has ensured that we did not get the much needed growth from the spending we have been doing. And so if your revenue to GDP ratio is low, typically if you are living within your means, your spending will be low. But we have not been able to curtail our spending. We acknowledge that spending stimulates growth. But we have spent comparably, but we have not gotten that growth. Let me give you an example. If you compare Ghana's tax to GDP ratio to Malaysia, and you compare that to Singapore, and you compare that to South Korea, you will see that the marginality is not exceptional. So what it means is that these countries, including Thailand, that from 1950s to early 60s, GDP per capita were almost at the same level, made it on the back of efficiency and prudent spending, which has eluded Ghana. Let me tell you something. If you look at the data, this government has essentially borrowed its way into bankruptcy. That's what has happened. We have borrowed our way into bankruptcy. If you look at our external debt, let's face the fact. And here, all the parties that have had a chance to govern this country are guilty. There's none holy. No, not one. But you can also see marginality in the excesses. You can see differences in the excesses. If you pick our external, the Eurobonds, no government has issued more Eurobonds than this current government. No government in our history. Look, you check the data. The total Eurobond stock from Nkrumah's, from President Kufuor's era to 2016, and compare Eurobond issuance after 2016, this government has the outstanding record. All government, including the NPP, the NDC government, also had a chance to retire certain Eurobonds that were issued by previous governments. The first Eurobond that was issued by President Kufuor.
That's not true. 2007 was the first time we accessed the Eurobond market. And that bond market was in 2017. 2017,
I'm coming.
Never retired Eurobond. No, I just want to put that fact across that is false, if you say so, please, with the Eurobond.
There was sinking fund, okay, towards the first retirement of the first Eurobond. And it's not only Eurobond. Government retire debts as they mature. So there are debts that the current government will retire that were taken by a previous government, and the previous government would have also retired certain debts, some components, if not all of them, that were issued by previous government. So when we look at public debt, we look at them in cumulative terms. So no government can claim ownership as the one that has retired other governments. All governments that have been in power have had a chance to retire them as they mature or retire them, okay, through liability management. So that is just the point that I'm trying to make, okay? Then again, when you look at total debt, it is the responsibility of government to manage the economy prudently and maintain stable exchange rate as part of its debt management strategy. So you cannot run away from the valuation effect. You cannot. The implication of the improper management of the economy, which has also escalated the exchange rate, is what worked Ghana into a liquidity problem towards 2022, for which reason it manifested in solvency problems for which we had to restructure our debt.
Okay.
What happened in the case of Ghana, Ben, was more of a liquidity constraint rather than solvency challenges. Because if you look at even our Euro bonds and you look at the maturity profile of our Euro bond, there would have been no compelling reason to restructure them because the repayments from 2026 and the rest of them were largely not a problem. It was the liquidity issue that because the spending did not inure to the benefit of the economy, we could not enhance the cash flow generating capacity of the economy to be able to service our debt. And therefore, debt servicing alone was taking more than 75% of our tax revenue.
Right.
We were not even talking about the principal repayment. So those are the dynamics. We cannot run away from that.
All right.
Even though exogenous factors have been present, let me tell you something. Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, in the first quarter of this year, went to the international capital market. The external factors did not exempt them. So let's face the fact. And then also bear this in mind. COVID year, Ghana's expenditure to GDP was one of the highest in the whole of Africa. That is not to suggest that COVID only happened in Ghana. So it's our response, our desire to abuse the system, take advantage of crisis, make money for ourselves through procurement infractions and the corruptions embedded in our public expenditure management. This is what has brought us here. Colleagues, let's face the fact.
Right, and on the back of COVID, we did get in excess of 21 billion Ghana cedis in terms of, boons from South Korea, other entities, among others. I do not know whom I have lost. Professor Bokpin, are you still on the line? Do we have Professor Bokpin on the line? Dr. Bano, are you on the line?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, so we'll try to get Prof. Bokpin. I wanted to get his final thoughts. In fact, both of you gentlemen, as we conclude, this will be the final point, and then maybe you can share any add-on thoughts. So if you look at our debt restructuring, especially externally, in terms of nominal value, when it comes to our debt, it has reduced the debt by, and reduced I use in quotation marks, by some 37%, so by $5 billion, if you want to put it that way. So we are left with about some $4.3 billion. How much of an impact did this have on this rating by Moody's, and what does it signify moving forward? You have about a minute to summarize on those thoughts.
Okay, let me please touch on a few things that Prof. Bokpin touched on. I find it a bit misleading, so it's very important that I clarify. Now, when Prof.
Yes, but we have limited time, so please make it very brief.
But it's important. This is economics, so it's important I make this clarification because you have a very big listener, and it's important we do. See, aside what the money is being used for when you go to borrow, the two other most important factors is the tenor, which is the number of years you have to repay the money, and two, the coupon rate. So if you are borrowing at a much coupon rate, for example, if I go to a bank and borrow 1,000 Ghana at an interest rate of 10.5%, and another person goes to that same bank and borrow 100,000 Ghana cedis at an interest rate of 8%, there's simple mathematics between you and me who has been shortchanged in terms of borrowing from that market. It is the one who borrowed 1,000 Ghana cedis and is going to pay an interest rate of 10.75%.
Okay, Dr. Bano,
at a much lower rate. So clearly, that argument that he makes does not even hold.
Okay, Dr. Bano, can you do me a favor? I'm sure you want Professor Bokpin to hear what you're saying. He went off the line. Yeah. He has to go lecture, and he has just a few minutes. So please indulge me. Let me bring him back. He'll summarize and then leave, and then you can continue, please, if that works for you.
Okay, that's
all right. Professor Bokpin, welcome back onto the conversation.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
So your final words, I just made mention of the fact that in terms of our external debt restructuring, now on the back of that, I'm sure Moody's has also acted. 37% was taken off our debt stock, so to speak, about the equivalent of about $5 billion. We are left with $4.3 billion. What will be the impact of that? What does it mean for our economy going forward? Your final words on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that for the period that the IMF program is in force, we have considerable fiscal space for the program to deliver on its objectives. But typically for borrowing, for economic management, you are looking at both the immediate, the medium, and the long term. So, because if the medium, the long term out is not positive that much, there are head, then it's cloud that we are accommodating the short term. Let me give you an example.
Prof, please reposition slightly. Reposition slightly for me.
Yes. If you look at the restructuring of the domestic debt, they released our plans in between 2023 and 2026. From 2027, 2028, we have bullet payments averaging 33.5 billion 2027-2028. Then when you look at how the external debt, again, they are classing in the period that we have the IMF reported up to 26. Again, what is that after 26, the headwinds stronger. And it wakes it up. When you again look at the energy sector shortfall, and then you look at all the fiscal triggers, it doesn't give you enough comfort that the long-term outlook presents a fiscal sustainability pathway. And I think the IMF knows, and government should also know that the short-term gains may not be sustainable. That is the point that I'm trying to make. Because when you go to the international capital market, you are going for long-term capital. Long-term capital means that the outlook must match the maturity largely. So we've made some gains, and don't forget, we cannot say this is an achievement, that you borrowed, you failed to pay, you punished pensioners, took their coupons, restructured their principal. You cannot pop champagne over that. We should feel sorry for ourselves. But of course, that is the sacrifice investors, pensioners have to make for this country to have a fresh start. Never in our history should we go take investors through this again.
Prof, we're so grateful for your time. Thank you for reconnecting, and we wish you the best of the day. Dr. Bano, please go back to your initial. I'm sorry I had to truncate your train of thought, but we had on for just a little window.
So the point I was making is, I mean, to any economist who tells you that every government has borrowed, and for that matter, it shouldn't be an excuse. And I was making the point that is very misleading. It is misleading with a classical example I just gave you, that if I go to a bank and borrow 1,000 Ghana at an exorbitant interest rate of, let's say, 11%, and I'm supposed to pay that money back in, let's say, 2 months, and you go to the same bank and borrow 100,000 Ghana at an interest rate of about 5%, and you are given 6 years to pay that amount of money, between myself and you, who has been shortchanged? Of course, it's me who has been shortchanged. So if any economist talks about the fact that every government has borrowed, then clearly whoever is making that argument does not understand these dynamics. That is the first point that I wanted to put across there. Then the next most important point that I want to put across is that, I mean, this is not the very first time that we've done debt restructuring as a country. I think we did some during Bush's time. I think 1969 we did. In 2001, when President Akufo-Addo assumed office, we did what we call the Government of Ghana Index-Linked Bond in 2001, where President Akufo said there was a need to restructure all government instruments, not growing to match the growth rate of I think about 5% there about that year. And if you read the literature and the reports from DOJ, That singular objective is one of the reasons why we have a very strong financial system in terms of the market, stock exchange and the rest in Ghana, and the facts are there for you to do. So clearly, I mean, no one is happy that government has restructured it. Clearly not. As an economist, I can't be proud of that. But I mean, the times necessitated the need to undertake such an audacious venture. But in going forward, and I have said that in going forward, to make sure that such occurrences do not happen again as far as the governance of this country is concerned. For me, the panacea is for us to focus on revenue mobilization. And Prof also made reference to South Africa and Malaysia. And I also think that argument is even flawed in the first place. Why? Now, these countries that he makes reference to, these are countries when it comes to public goods and services. Classical example, it's roads. Classical example, it's infrastructure. These countries do not have a huge deficit in terms of these public goods and services. And for that matter, when these countries borrow, it goes directly into activities that will, the ordinary Ghanaian or the ordinary citizen on the street will see results. But when you come to Ghana and most sub-Saharan African countries, because there is a huge infrastructural deficit, so in many a time, when government borrows, it goes into providing these infrastructure. Again, another thing that has also taken a chunk of the revenue that we have mobilized over the year, not just this government, has got to do with payment of government workers. I mean, if you look at the 2024 budget statement, that is the number one item which is speaking about.
You want to bring in the payment of public sector workers. I don't know whether you want to go into that.
No. So I am making a point that what actually takes a chunk of government revenue. And in going forward, we can only ensure that some of these factors are mitigated when government can raise enough revenue. Again, when government can also allow enough private participation in terms of the provision of public goods and services. That is the only way government can reduce its spending and, for that matter, meet the fiscal consolidation that we all seek going into the long term.
Doc, we're grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion this morning, and thanks for your patience holding for Professor Bokpin. So, Dr. Frank Bano is head of research at the Dankwa Institute. He's also a lecturer at GIMPA. We also had Professor Godfred Bokpin, who is with the University of Ghana Business School. We've been looking at Moody's, positive outlook as far as Ghana's economy is concerned. CAA2 from CAA3 and CA. But what does that mean for the ordinary Ghanaian? The economists from both ends have given their verdict. What does the future hold? Time will tell. Do stay with us. There are more interesting, germane stories we're bringing your way right here on the AM Show.
Have not shown sign of settling down.
Oh, you don't mean it. The power to deliver
I might have a solution.
You take this and spray it twice. Shake the gem. Place it on your lips and say the magic word.
Yes.
You, my darling, are unlucky.